For more than half a century, Diane Keaton was the heartbeat of American cinema. The woman whose laughter filled rooms, whose awkward grace became iconic, whose every glance held both innocence and wisdom. She wasn't just an actress. She was Diane Keaton, a symbol of courage, of individuality, of living unapologetically. From Annie Hall to The Godfather, from the romantic comedies that made audiences smile to the intimate dramas that made them cry, Diane didn't just play roles, she lived them. Every performance was a mirror of her heart, honest, unpolished, and deeply human. And that's why her passing hit differently. This wasn't just the loss of a legend. It was the loss of a spirit, one that had quietly taught generations that being different wasn't wrong, it was beautiful. Yet even as tributes began pouring in, there was something about her death that stirred more than grief. Something hidden beneath the shock. Because behind the laughter, behind the eccentric fashion, and behind that unforgettable smile, Diane Keaton had been building something. Something no one fully understood until now. For decades, she lived with quiet intention. She saved, she restored, she wrote, and she planned, in ways few around her ever realized. The wealth she accumulated wasn't just the result of box office success or Hollywood fame. It was the reflection of a lifetime spent observing, collecting, and giving in secret. In the days that followed her death, as lawyers unsealed private papers and her family began sorting through her possessions, whispers started spreading about the letters she'd written, the art she'd hidden, and the fortune she'd left behind. But what truly stunned the world wasn't the number written on a bank statement. It was what she did with it. When the details of her final will began to surface, even her closest friends were moved to tears. Because Diane Keaton's last act wasn't about herself, it was about everyone else. The discovery of what she left behind, the choices she made, the people she quietly helped, the legacy she designed in silence, became one of the most emotional revelations in modern Hollywood history. As her family and friends gathered to celebrate her life, they uncovered not just wealth, but wisdom. Not just generosity, but purpose. For years, she had been telling the world, "Don't be afraid to be yourself." And in death, she proved those words were never a line from a movie, they were her truth. So tonight, as we look back on the extraordinary life of Diane Keaton, the actress, the artist, the mother, and the mystery, we'll uncover the untold story of how one woman's final gift made the world cry, and then somehow made it believe again. Because this isn't just the story of a Hollywood legend. It's the story of a woman who lived her life like a poem, beautiful, brave, and unfinished. And what she left behind will change everything. Before the laughter, the hats, and the film awards, there was just a curious little girl named Diane Hall. She was born on January 5, 1946, in Los Angeles, California, the city that would one day know her name like its own. Yet back then, she wasn't anyone's idea of a future movie star. She was shy, awkward, a little offbeat, the kind of girl who didn't fit neatly into anyone's expectations. Her father, Jack Hall, was a civil engineer and real estate broker, practical, quiet, steady. Her mother, Dorothy Keaton Hall, was a photographer, a homemaker, and a dreamer who filled their home with creativity. It was from Dorothy that Diane inherited her sense of wonder, and that restless need to turn ordinary life into something extraordinary. In later years, Diane would often speak about her childhood with warmth and nostalgia, recalling a family that laughed easily but dreamed big. She remembered watching her mother win a homemaker competition, a moment that lit a fire in her. "I wanted to be seen," Diane once said, "just like my mother was that day. I wanted to be somebody." But fame wasn't her first dream. She wanted to express herself, through music, art, photography, anything that allowed her to capture beauty in strange, imperfect ways. At Santa Ana High School, she sang in the choir, wrote for the yearbook, and daydreamed about Broadway. When she graduated, she didn't follow the expected path of marriage or a safe career. She moved towards something uncertain, something bold, the stage. In college, at Santa Ana College and later at the neighborhood Playhouse School of the Theater in New York City, Diane found her true voice. But it wasn't easy. Her peers were elegant and composed. She was clumsy, loud, and funny. Still, she never changed herself to fit in. "I wasn't cool," she would later say, "but I was different, and that turned out to be my greatest asset." It was in New York that she dropped her father's last name and took her mother's maiden name, Keaton. It was a simple decision, but symbolic. Diane Keaton was born out of Diane Hall's determination to become something she could define on her own terms. She worked nights, auditioned days, and took small parts wherever she could find them. The world wasn't watching yet, but she was already rehearsing the role of a lifetime herself. In those early years, Diane didn't just chase dreams. She built them, brick by brick, in the chaos of a city that rarely made room for dreamers. And though she didn't know it yet, Hollywood was waiting for her. When Diane Keaton arrived in New York in the late 1960s, Broadway was electric, full of energy, protest, and transformation. It was an era of revolution, and she fit right in. Her first big break came when she joined the cast of Hair, the countercultural musical that defined a generation. But true to form, she didn't follow the crowd. While the rest of the cast performed nude during one of the show's famous scenes, Diane refused. She wasn't trying to be difficult, she was making a statement. She would never trade her individuality for conformity. That choice, simple, stubborn, and deeply Diane, caught people's attention. She wasn't just another actress. She was someone who lived by her own rules. Soon, she was cast in an off-Broadway play called Play It Again, Sam, written by a neurotic, rising comedian named Woody Allen. Their connection was instant, strange, electric, and impossible to ignore. Diane's quirky charm balanced his nervous energy. On stage, they created magic. Audiences couldn't take their eyes off her. She was spontaneous, unpredictable, and authentic. Every line she delivered sounded real. That performance changed her life. When the play was adapted into a film in 1972, Woody Allen insisted on keeping Diane as his co-star. Hollywood took notice. She wasn't the typical leading lady, not glamorous in the conventional way, not polished like the others. But there was something magnetic about her. Around the same time, she landed another role, one that would take her to the very heart of American cinema, Kay Adams in The Godfather, 1972. It was a film about power, loyalty, and corruption, and Diane's quiet performance stood out amid the violence and grandeur. She wasn't just playing Michael Corleone's wife, she was giving a face to moral conflict. That movie made her famous, but it didn't make her predictable. In an industry obsessed with image, Diane refused to play along. She wore men's suits, spoke her mind, and laughed to herself in interviews. She didn't act like a Hollywood star, and maybe that's why people loved her. Through the 1970s, she built a reputation as both an actress and an enigma. Directors saw in her what audiences saw: honesty. There was no pretense, no artifice. She could make heartbreak look graceful and comedy look profound. Her partnership with Woody Allen deepened, both on screen and off. Together, they made several films that defined the decade's style and wit. But nothing would prepare the world for what came next. Because in 1977, Diane Keaton would give a performance that would forever change the landscape of film, and make her name immortal. When Annie Hall hit theaters in 1977, it wasn't just a movie. It was a revelation. The film, written and directed by Woody Allen, told the story of a neurotic comedian and the woman he couldn't forget. But what audiences didn't know was that it was inspired by real life, by Diane herself. The title character, Annie Hall, wasn't a creation. She was Diane Keaton, disguised only slightly behind the name she once wore before fame. Her real name was Diane Hall. Her nickname, from childhood, was Annie. The character's mannerisms, clothes, voice, laughter, all were hers. When she walked onto the screen, she wasn't acting. She was being. From the moment she appeared, wearing a men's tie, vest, and floppy hat, she redefined what beauty and femininity meant in Hollywood. Her style became a cultural movement. Women everywhere copied her look. Fashion houses studied it. And for the first time in years, audiences fell in love not with perfection, but with authenticity. The chemistry between Allen and Keaton was electric, funny, heartbreaking, real. Their on-screen relationship mirrored their real one, full of affection, confusion, and unspoken emotion. It felt raw because it was raw. Critics hailed Annie Hall as a masterpiece. It won 4 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Actress for Diane Keaton. When she walked on stage to accept the Oscar, she was overwhelmed, almost shy, as if she couldn't quite believe it was happening. But behind that joy was something else. She later admitted that success terrified her as much as failure. Fame was a mirror, and she wasn't sure she liked the reflection. "I never wanted to be perfect," she said. "I just wanted to be honest." That honesty became her trademark. After Annie Hall, she could have played safe roles, but she didn't. She sought characters that were messy, strange, and real, women who broke the mold, just as she had done in life. Her performance in Annie Hall didn't just win her an Oscar. It changed the way women were written in film. For the first time, a female character could be awkward, contradictory, intelligent, emotional, all at once. Diane Keaton showed the world that women didn't have to be flawless to be unforgettable. And from that moment on, she wasn't just a movie star. She was a movement. For someone who spent much of her life portraying love on screen, Diane Keaton's own relationships were far more complex, private, and deeply human than any movie script could capture. She was open-hearted but cautious, passionate but guarded, a woman who loved fully yet always seemed to stand a few steps outside the frame, observing, analyzing, feeling everything. Her first great love in the public eye was with Woody Allen, the man whose creative world intertwined with her own. Their connection began in the late 1960s during Play It Again, Sam, and it was electric. They were in many ways opposites. He was cerebral, neurotic, constantly questioning. She was spontaneous, bright, and fearless in her honesty. Yet they fit together like pieces from two different puzzles that somehow made a perfect picture. For years, they shared a quiet, offbeat companionship that transcended the labels of Hollywood romance. Even after their romantic relationship ended, their friendship endured. They continued working together, creating some of cinema's most iconic moments. "He gave me my career," she once said, "but more than that, he gave me a voice." Their affection lasted for decades, long after the cameras stopped rolling. Then came Warren Beatty, one of Hollywood's most famously charming men. Diane was cast opposite him in Reds, 1981, a film as ambitious as it was intense. Beatty was demanding, brilliant, and driven. Diane was equally passionate and unafraid to challenge him. Their creative chemistry turned into something deeper, a relationship that was both exhilarating and exhausting. She later described him as a genius, a lover of ideas, and a man who couldn't be contained. Their time together was fiery, full of admiration but also tension, and ultimately unsustainable. After Beatty came another figure who would leave a permanent mark on her life, Al Pacino. They met while filming the Godfather trilogy, and what began as a working relationship slowly grew into something personal and profound. Pacino, reserved and intense, met his match in Diane, who balanced his seriousness with warmth and humor. "I loved him deeply," she later admitted. "But he was not the marrying kind." When their relationship ended, Diane was heartbroken but never bitter. "He was the love of my life," she confessed years later, "but I wanted more than he could give." Through each of these loves, Diane never lost her sense of self. She learned that love didn't have to lead to marriage, that heartbreak wasn't failure, and that vulnerability was a kind of strength. Each relationship shaped her art, her worldview, and her understanding of herself. By the time the 1990s arrived, Diane had stepped away from romantic entanglements. She poured her energy into her work, her home, and the life she was quietly building away from the limelight. But love, in a different form, was still waiting for her. In a world that worshipped glamour, Diane Keaton made oddness beautiful. From the moment she walked onto the screen in Annie Hall, wearing loose men's trousers, vests and floppy hats, she changed fashion forever. It wasn't a costume, it was her. Those clothes came straight from her own closet. She had always felt more comfortable dressing for herself, not for others. "I don't like to show too much," she once said. "Mystery is more interesting than exposure." The world fell in love with that mystery. Designers like Ralph Lauren credited her with redefining how women could express confidence without sacrificing individuality. The Keaton look, oversized jackets, turtlenecks, gloves and bowler hats, became timeless. Yet behind that signature style was a woman who battled her own insecurities. In interviews, she often spoke with disarming honesty about her self-doubt. "I'm always terrified," she admitted. "Every time I go to work, I think, this is the one where they'll find out I'm a fraud." That humility made her relatable. She wasn't a distant movie goddess, she was someone who laughed nervously, who overthought everything, who found comfort in the absurd. Her performances reflected that duality. Whether it was the comedic vulnerability of Baby Boom, 1987, the fragile strength in Marvin's Room, 1996, or the late career romance of Something's Gotta Give, 2003, Diane made every role feel alive. She wasn't playing characters, she was playing truth. Off-screen, her mystery deepened. She bought and restored old homes in Los Angeles, turning forgotten spaces into pieces of living art. She filled her walls with black and white photographs, furniture from antique shops, and handwritten notes. Her world was a museum of memories, each object holding meaning. Friends described her as both vibrant and reclusive. One moment she would be telling stories with wild enthusiasm. The next, she'd disappear into her art, content in solitude. She never married, and though the world kept asking why, her answer never changed: "I didn't want to give up my independence." And yet, she didn't live without love. She simply learned to find it in different ways, in friendship, creativity, and the quiet joy of everyday life. In her 60s, she began to withdraw further from public life. She gave fewer interviews, took fewer roles, and devoted herself to passions that had nothing to do with the spotlight. But while the cameras might have faded, her aura never did. She had become something rarer than a star. She had become an idea. A reminder that confidence doesn't mean perfection. That beauty isn't about youth. That authenticity, raw, unfiltered, fearless, never goes out of style. Diane Keaton's life took a quiet but profound turn in the mid-1990s, when she became a mother. She had spent decades creating characters, building a career and exploring art, but motherhood became her most transformative role of all. She was in her early 50s when she made the decision to adopt her first child, Dexter, in 1996. A few years later, she adopted a son, Duke. At a time when society still questioned older single women choosing motherhood, Diane followed her instincts. "I always wanted to be a mother," she said. "I just didn't want to wait for someone to give me permission." Her home, once filled with scripts and art projects, soon filled with toys, laughter, and chaos. Friends said she was endlessly patient, playful, and deeply protective. She didn't raise her children in the shadow of Hollywood. She gave them something simpler: privacy, stability, and unconditional love. Motherhood changed her in ways no role ever could. It grounded her, softened her, gave her purpose beyond herself. "They saved me," she would say of her children. "They made me braver." Still, she remained candid about the challenges of single parenting. She juggled work, motherhood, and her creative passions with her usual blend of humor and honesty. "I didn't know what I was doing half the time," she laughed in one interview. "But I figured, love would get us through." Her children became her anchor. She once described Dexter as wise beyond her years, calm, thoughtful, intuitive, and Duke as energetic, curious, a spark of light. They kept her young, even as she gracefully aged out of Hollywood's relentless spotlight. Her later years were quieter, but no less meaningful. She wrote books, photographed California's historic architecture, and continued her preservation work. Most of all, she spent her days with her children, creating the kind of home she'd always dreamed of: warm, creative, imperfect, full of love. Diane never needed the traditional trappings of family to feel complete. She built one herself, with courage, independence, and heart. And though she never said it aloud, those who knew her best believed that her children were her greatest legacy. Not her films, not her fame, not even her fortune. Because in the end, Diane Keaton didn't just redefine Hollywood. She redefined life itself. Behind Diane Keaton's infectious laugh and quirky charm lay a quiet, lifelong battle, one that few saw and even fewer understood. She was a woman who appeared endlessly confident, whose individuality inspired millions. Yet for decades, Diane struggled with a deep insecurity that manifested in the most painful of ways: an eating disorder that haunted her through much of her early career. In her memoir Then Again, Diane spoke openly, and bravely, about her battle with bulimia, which began when she was a young woman trying to fit into the narrow expectations of Hollywood beauty. It started innocently, a desire to be perfect, to appear camera-ready, to please casting directors and audiences. But soon, it became a dangerous compulsion, a silent form of control in a world where so much felt uncontrollable. She would later recall that there were days when she would binge and purge 20 times, and still feel empty. Her humor, her eccentric energy, all of it often masked the war she waged against her own body. "I was lost in the madness of trying to be enough," she once said. But Diane, as always, refused to be defeated. She sought help, leaned on therapy, and began to see her struggles not as shame but as experience, proof of her humanity. The woman who had once lived in silence began to speak, using her voice to help others understand that imperfection was not failure, and vulnerability was not weakness. She transformed pain into art. Many of her most heartfelt performances, In Marvin's Room, Reds, and Looking for Mr. Goodbar, carried the emotional scars of someone who had seen darkness and chosen light. Every tear, every laugh, every uncertain glance she gave on screen carried an authenticity born from her own battles. That duality, fragility wrapped in humor, sadness hidden beneath smiles, was what made Diane Keaton so magnetic. She wasn't trying to be perfect anymore. She was just trying to be real. And in that truth, she became something far greater than an actress. She became a mirror, for anyone who had ever doubted their worth, yet found the courage to keep going. As much as the world adored Diane Keaton the actress, there was another Diane, quieter, creative, and deeply reflective, who existed far away from the glitter of red carpets. She was, at her core, an artist in every sense. When she wasn't performing, she was behind the camera, capturing the essence of life through photography. Her images told stories of aging buildings, forgotten neighborhoods, and fleeting moments that most people passed by without noticing. Diane's love for architecture and restoration became one of her great life passions. She bought and restored historic homes across Los Angeles, Spanish colonials, early century bungalows, and mid-century masterpieces, each one a personal project, each one a piece of her heart. She treated homes like characters, giving them a second chance, much like she often did for herself. Friends often joked that she could spend hours examining a single doorknob, tracing its history with fascination. But for Diane, these spaces were more than structures. They were stories, physical representations of time, beauty, and endurance. In between restoration projects, she wrote books about architecture, photography, and her own life. Titles like House, California Romantica, and Let's Just Say It Wasn't Pretty revealed her unique perspective, that beauty lies in imperfection, and meaning is found in the overlooked corners of the world. Away from the camera's glare, Diane lived simply. She preferred quiet mornings filled with coffee and jazz music, long walks with her dogs, and evenings surrounded by her children. She once said, "I think I love silence as much as I love laughter. Both make me feel alive." Her home, an eclectic blend of antiques, black and white photos and vintage furniture, reflected her soul, artistic, nostalgic, and beautifully chaotic. To those who knew her best, Diane wasn't just a star, she was a collector of life. She gathered memories, moments, and pieces of the world that others ignored. And without realizing it, she was building something far more meaningful than fame. Something lasting. Something that would outlive her. Most actors fade from the spotlight with age, but Diane Keaton only grew brighter. While many of her peers retired or took smaller roles, Diane entered her 60s and 70s with the same energy and wit that made her a star in the first place. Hollywood might have changed, but Diane remained timeless. Her 2003 hit, Something's Gotta Give, opposite Jack Nicholson, became a cultural phenomenon, not just for its romance, but because it showed love, desire, and self-discovery were not reserved for the young. The film shattered stereotypes, proving that women of a certain age could still lead, charm, and inspire. Diane's performance earned her another Academy Award nomination, decades after Annie Hall. She followed it with a string of hits, The Family Stone, 2005, Because I Said So, 2007, and later Book Club, 2018, where she starred alongside Jane Fonda, Candice Bergen, and Mary Steenburgen. Audiences adore her all over again, her awkward grace, her unfiltered honesty, her ability to laugh at life's absurdities. Even as she aged, she refused to conform to Hollywood's expectations. She didn't chase youth through surgery or reinvention. She wore her years proudly, her silver hair, her wrinkles, her authenticity, all part of her signature. "Aging isn't a disease," she said once. "It's just another adventure." Directors loved working with her because she brought truth to every role. She didn't act, she inhabited. Whether playing a grieving widow or a hopeful romantic, she reminded audiences that beauty and vitality have nothing to do with age. Even in her later projects, like Mac and Rita, 2022, she continued to make audiences laugh, proving her comedic timing was as sharp as ever. Through every decade, every transformation of Hollywood, Diane Keaton remained one of its purest, most enduring souls. Her career was not built on luck or image, it was built on authenticity. And authenticity, unlike fame, never fades. In her later years, Diane Keaton began to speak with more openness about solitude. To some, her life, unmarried, often private, seemed lonely. But to Diane, it was something else entirely. "I like my own company," she once said. "I've spent my life falling in love, with people, with places, with ideas. Maybe that's enough." She often spoke of her past relationships with warmth, not regret. Al Pacino, Warren Beatty, Woody Allen, each had a place in her memory, but she had long stopped longing for what could have been. She understood that some loves were meant to shape you, not stay with you. Still, her reflections revealed something deeper, more introspective. "I think love changes form as you grow older," she told the New York Times. "It becomes less about passion and more about peace." Yet beneath those words, there was a quiet melancholy, a sense of someone who had made peace with her choices, even as she wondered what might have been. She often spoke of her mother, Dorothy Hall, a woman she admired profoundly, and how her death left a void that time could never fill. "I think everything I've done," Diane admitted, "was a way of talking to my mother, of trying to make her proud." In her solitude, she found clarity. She wrote about her fears of aging, her gratitude for her children, and her desire to leave something behind that mattered. Not just money or fame, but meaning. As the years went on, she spent less time in public and more time at home, painting, reading, walking her dogs through the streets of Beverly Hills. Friends said she seemed peaceful, yet there was always a touch of nostalgia in her eyes, as if she knew something the world didn't. Her interviews became rarer, her words softer. She spoke of legacy, of gratitude, of finding beauty in endings. And those who truly listened sensed that Diane Keaton, the eternal romantic, the fearless dreamer, was quietly preparing for her next act. An act that no camera could capture. One final masterpiece of grace, memory, and mystery. In the twilight of her life, Diane Keaton's world grew smaller, not out of fear, but out of intention. She had lived a life surrounded by cameras, directors, and crowds that adored her. Now, she wanted quiet. Friends noticed that she began turning down public appearances. There were no more premieres, no more magazine shoots. Instead, she spent her days tending to her garden, walking her dogs, and reading under the soft California sun. Her home, a serene Spanish-style sanctuary nestled in Los Angeles, became her haven, filled with music, laughter, and the familiar warmth of family. She often invited her daughter Dexter and son Duke over for dinner. Those who were close to her said that in her last year, she was more sentimental than usual, lingering longer on hugs, reminiscing more often, and speaking about gratitude as if it were her final script. She talked about peace a lot, one friend recalled. She said she was ready for a slower rhythm, ready to stop chasing the next thing. Her final interviews reflected that same calm acceptance. In one of them, she smiled softly and said, "I've had more than my fair share of miracles. If tomorrow never comes, I'll still be the luckiest woman alive." Fans didn't notice the subtle changes at first, the thinning frame, the faint weariness behind her vibrant smile. But those who knew her best could sense something unspoken. It wasn't sadness. It was surrender, the quiet acceptance that she had told her story, lived her art, and loved deeply enough to be at peace. In the last few months, she began spending more time with her children, going through old photo albums, and laughing about the past. She was sentimental but strong, Dexter said later. She never once seemed afraid. Diane never made any dramatic announcement or public farewell. True to her nature, she chose privacy over spectacle. She faded gently, like a beautiful scene closing without sound. And when the world least expected it, that scene ended. Suddenly, quietly, heartbreakingly. A chapter closed. And Hollywood would never be the same. It happened on October 11, 2025, a morning that would forever be etched into Hollywood's memory. News outlets broke the story just after dawn. Diane Keaton, beloved actress, filmmaker and icon, has passed away at the age of 79. For a moment, the world stood still. Social media flooded with disbelief, tributes, and heartbreak. Hashtags bearing her name trended within minutes. Fans posted photos of Annie Hall, Something's Gotta Give, and The Godfather, writing messages of gratitude, sorrow, and love. Her co-stars were among the first to speak. Al Pacino released a statement that read simply, "There was no one like her, there never will be again." Warren Beatty called her the heartbeat of every room she entered. And Woody Allen, visibly shaken in a rare public statement, said, "Diane was the most authentic person I ever knew. She was my muse, my friend, my hero." From Meryl Streep to Jane Fonda, from Sarah Jessica Parker to Reese Witherspoon, Hollywood's most powerful voices united in grief. Every tribute shared a common truth. Diane Keaton wasn't just an actress, she was a feeling. Fans gathered outside her star on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, leaving flowers, hats, and handwritten notes. Someone placed a copy of Annie Hall beside a single white rose. Another left a floppy hat and a message that read, "You made being different beautiful." Television networks replayed her greatest moments. Her laughter, her wisdom, her quiet defiance against conformity. For millions, it wasn't just the death of a celebrity, it felt like losing a friend. Even the younger generation, who knew her from book club and social media, felt the loss deeply. One fan wrote, "She made aging look fearless. She made awkwardness look cool. She made me feel seen." In a world obsessed with perfection, Diane had shown that imperfection was art. And now, her absence left a silence that no one could fill. Her children released a brief statement that captured everything she stood for. "Our mother lived as she loved, with humor, honesty, and grace. She gave us everything. And though the world has lost her, her spirit lives in every smile she left behind." For days, Hollywood mourned. Theaters dimmed their lights. Talk shows played montages in her honor. And across the world, millions whispered the same thing. "Thank you, Diane." Diane Keaton's children began the emotional task of sorting through her belongings. They expected photo albums, journals, maybe a few of her famous hats. What they found, however, was something far more profound. Inside a cedar chest in her study, tucked beneath years of journals, film memorabilia, and notebooks, were boxes of handwritten letters. Dozens of them. Each carefully labeled and sealed in her delicate handwriting. Some were addressed to people she loved: Al, Warren, Woody, Mom, Dexter, Duke. Others were simply marked to my fans, to the dreamers, to the one I never met. Each letter was a window into her soul, poetic, funny, raw, and deeply moving. To her children, she wrote, "I hope I gave you more laughter than worry. You were my greatest adventure. You were the life I always dreamed of living." To her fans, she wrote, "You loved me when I didn't love myself. You made me brave enough to be strange, to be loud, to be me. If I ever made you smile, even once, that's my forever." And to her younger self, she penned a message that stopped everyone in their tracks. "You thought you had to be perfect. But the truth is, Your flaws were your magic. Don't ever hide again. Alongside the letters were hundreds of photographs, candid moments, Polaroids, old negatives from her architecture projects, and sketches for unmade films. She had documented everything: her homes, her children's laughter, her aging face in the mirror, her favorite trees outside her window. There were also a few voice recordings, messages she had recorded in her final months. In one, she can be heard saying with a soft laugh, "If you're hearing this, then I guess I've gone on my next big adventure. Don't be sad. I had the best time being alive." When these letters and recordings were shared with the public, the world cried all over again. Because in death, Diane Keaton had done what she always did best: she made people feel. For decades, Diane Keaton was never one to flaunt her wealth. She was known to live comfortably, yes, but modestly. Her charm was never in luxury, it was in authenticity. So when the details of her estate began to surface, the world was stunned. Her lawyers revealed that Diane's net worth exceeded $120 million, built through decades of acting, directing, book publishing, real estate, and art collection. But it wasn't the number that shocked everyone, it was where it was going. According to her final will and testament, Diane had divided her fortune into several astonishing gifts. A major portion was left to her children, Dexter and Duke, not just as inheritance, but as trusts to fund their own creative and humanitarian pursuits. "Use it to make something beautiful," she had written. Millions more were dedicated to historic preservation and environmental causes, particularly for restoring old homes and protecting California's architectural heritage, her lifelong passion. A significant donation was made to the Motion Picture and Television Fund, ensuring that aging actors and crew members could live their final years with dignity and care. And perhaps most touching of all, she left a trust for single mothers over 50, women who, like her, chose an unconventional path to motherhood. Her attorney said that Diane planned every detail with care. "She didn't just leave money," he said. "She left meaning." When the news broke, fans were overwhelmed. Social media filled once again with tears and gratitude. One message captured it perfectly: even in death, Diane Keaton found a way to lift others up. Her children later shared that she had spent her final year arranging every detail, making sure her legacy wasn't about fame, but about kindness. She left behind mansions, photographs, films, and writings. But her real treasure, the one that made her family cry, was her heart. Because in the end, Diane Keaton's greatest fortune wasn't measured in dollars. It was measured in the lives she touched, the laughter she left behind, and the love she gave so freely to a world that adored her. For Dexter and Duke Keaton, their mother's passing was both an ending and a beginning. The house that once echoed with laughter and jazz now felt unbearably quiet. Yet everywhere they looked, there she was, in the walls she restored, the photos she took, the books she wrote, and the love she left behind. In the days after her death, the siblings spent long nights sitting together, reading through her journals and letters. Many of her words were simple, but each carried the weight of her heart. And that was the unforgettable story of Diane Keaton, a woman who didn't just live a Hollywood dream, but turned her entire life into a masterpiece of courage, laughter, and love. Her journey reminds us that fame fades, money disappears, but the way you make people feel, that lasts forever. If Diane's story touched your heart, if her words made you smile, or if her legacy made you see life a little differently, then don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss another story that moves the soul. Because here, we don't just talk about celebrities, we uncover the humanity behind the headlines. The pain, the beauty, the meaning that makes their lives unforgettable.